You are listening to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss our RC adventures.
Welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss the ups and downs of the new RC Flyer. Join your hosts, Michael and Jay, as they take flight at the park. Now on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast. I'm Michael from Arizona. With me always are my good friends,
Jay from the hills of Texas.
And AK Mike in Texas.
and welcome back to the podcast. Last week, or last time, I guess, we were talking a little bit about motor electric to, or actually gas to electric conversions. And Mike, you had some good, valid points after our last episode, and had a couple of questions, or at least wanted to kind of make a couple of clarifications, I think.
Well, when I listened to it, it was funny because, this is the conversation when I first started doing foamies with Jay, which is how we met. The conversations I would always have with Jay is, well, I want to do this. He goes, well, it depends. And it would drive me nuts because he'd say that all the time. It's like, you're killing me, dude. Like, what does it depend on? And so, I kind of heard that sort of conversation in the podcast, except for you had the answers to the questions. It just felt like, for me, as I started listening again, it reminded me that really what it really depends on is the variables that are going to limit you. And you guys talked about that. So it's not like you didn't talk about it. You did talk about it. But like the perfect example was, well, if you have a plane and it can only have a 10 size prop, well, then you have to start there because that's as big as the prop it can be. So from that point, that's when you're going to figure out, because it's a 10 size prop, there's only so many motors that can turn that 10 size prop. And you talked about KV, and you talked about, what those different things. And so as you find one of those limitations, whether it be weight or the size of the battery that's going to go in the plane, if it's just a Park Flyer foamy, I may only be able to put a 2-cell small battery in it because of how small the plane is. So that's going to limit what kind of motors it'll drive, which will also limit what size of a propeller it will need, etc.
So that's a good thing that you bring up, because one of the things that we did mention was the weight of the airplane. So I think if we were to put the limitations in order, the first thing is the weight of the aircraft. If you have a little foamy, you're obviously not going to put a 6-cell battery in a little foamy, right? So whatever aircraft.
Yeah, I mean,
unless you're Jay.
five nickels together, because a 6-cell,
exactly
nickel size.
So I think that in this particular case, we were talking to gas airplanes are much bigger, right? So we're not really talking about
they are, and I liked what you said about that, right? Because that's a real easy way to start with. I'm going to have this size. I have this weight plane. It's going to require this much thrust or whatever to drive it. And there are charts out in the world to adjust that. And if you can't find them, I know they're out there, but then you would go from
if you can't find it, just send us an email at parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com. We'll send you one.
Yep.
They're easy to find on the internet, but we can get you one.
Yep. And then that drives the size motor you're going to have because of the weight. You need to have a certain thing, which then you're going to have. So you were talking in order. So it was the weight, and then what?
Yeah. So I think the weight of the aircraft is the first one, and then maybe battery size is the second one, because this is a good example of you.
What about your prop size? You don't feel like?
Nope. A prop. One of the things about a prop is that it's a couple of dollars, right? If you needed a new prop, you can spend anywhere from $1 at Hobby King, or up to, if you're going to get a master air screw prop, you're going to spend somewhere north of, depending on the type of airplane that I have, some of them are $18 to $24. So I think that that's somewhat reasonable, that you can exchange props very easily, because you just spend the new one on, as opposed to the size of the battery. A 6-cell battery could be up to $100 and something, where a 4-cell battery may only be $40. So depending on a budget and what I'm going to run on it, if they do make bigger motors that will run off of a 6-cell and a bigger motor that will run off of a 4-cell. So if I have an airplane that weighs 3 pounds, let's say, and I need 150 watts, then I can actually look at the motors that will actually produce 150 watts on a 6-cell or 150 watts on a 4-cell, because they are out there. Right. And so I think that the weight being the first one of my aircraft, then I'm going to have to look at the size of the battery that I can fit into the airplane, because I have a pattern airplane that won't take anything bigger than a 4-cell. Now, it wants a 5,000 milliamp 4-cell, but a 4-cell is as big as I can get. And this is a size 60 airplane. And you could put a gas motor on it, but it's, I have an electric one, and I'm stuck with the battery that's only 4-cell. So I think
if you're solid against the ground, like if you have a trike gear or even a tail dragger, and you want to put a 13 size prop on there, but you can't, isn't that still going to be an issue? I think that's what I'm talking about when I say prop size, not from a cost perspective, but from a physical limitation size.
Right.
And I don't disagree with you, but I think that the motor is going to drive that. Right? If I have a big enough motor, I could put a bigger size prop on it. But if I have a smaller motor, I can't
lesser
put a
size.
12.
Yeah.
Right. So if I have a 4-cell type motor,
so I see.
I'm not going to put a 13-inch prop on it.
The battery's going to drive what size motor anyway, and so your next limitation is the battery. I see. That makes sense.
That is correct. Right? Yeah. So the battery.
So
would
what
be
you're
the next
saying
one.
is, So what you're saying is, take my plane, figure out the weight, whether I get that from specs or just physically weigh it, and then I have to include potential weight of battery. It's potential weight. And so
that's correct.
You take the heaviest one that you might use, 5,000 6-cell, and you'd say, oh, that weighs, whatever it does, and I would add that to the weight of the plane, because that's going to be part of the calculation. Okay, great. And then from there, you're gonna get the motor size that you want, because that 4-cell can now only drive a certain thing, and you got to find the one that produces the watts you need to drive that thing, right?
That is correct. And so I can actually, a 4-cell motor can come in a very tiny package, right? Or for instance, a good example, the airplane that you came down here and built, the Funracer, that was a 4-cell or a 3-cell. So the motor could take either or, but we weren't swapping the props out.
No,
I mean, if we did a 3-cell battery, we could actually up the prop just slightly.
Yeah,
by 1
because
or
the
2.
ESC would be able to handle it.
Correct, because the prop size is going to drive the amps that are going through your ESC. So what I'm saying is that you have a 4-cell that will drive a Funracer. I have a 4-cell that will drive a 60 size pattern airplane. But I bet you we're using, slightly different propellers, because the motor that I have may be big enough to fit in your hand, where the motor you're using is 2
3 fingers or something.
Yeah, it's the size of a roll of quarters. Even though it's using a 4-cell battery, mine's much bigger, has a lower KV. So the lower KV means I can use a bigger prop because I have a bigger airplane. So it produces more wattage.
I remember converting a brushed motor airplane with Electro. Remember that one, Jay? The Electro, that purple one?
Electro Streak. It was like the Electro
Streak.
Something.
Thank you. And it had a brush motor, which was just crap for it. It really was anemic for it.
Yeah, sure.
And we found a 900 kV motor that could swing a bigger prop. And same size battery, all that stuff, weight, everything was identical. And that thing hauled ass. Plus, it just sipped on the power because it was a 900 kV and we were swinging a big ass prop.
Right.
So I mean, all those things are relevant. So you got weight, size of your battery, and then the motor needed to drive it, and then the prop.
Before I did the motor, though, I would look at what my ESC option is. Because your ESC option. Well, okay. Once again, for instance, for you, right?
Those are tied, though, aren't they? The motor and the ESC options are pretty tied together, aren't they?
Not really. No.
Okay.
I mean, you can tie them together, but what I'm saying is that most guys have some sort of electric, right? So I know Jim who we're kind of using it as an example, he has multiple electric airplanes, but he has gas airplanes too, right? So his choice is to go out and buy a new ESC for the new gas conversion, or he might have one. In Jay's case, Jay says, oh, well, I have an ESC right here. Let's just use this one. Well, if that ESC is a max, amperage of 30 to 45 amps, then you're going to have to get a motor that's only going to drive 30 to 45 amps.
Right. And so my point was, you really want to find the motor you want to use to fly the thing, and then you're going to figure out what the amps it's going to take to draw it to get to see it. You're trying to go from, I have existing equipment, and I'm just trying to go from, I need to solve this this engineering problem of getting this plane to fly, and then I'm going to go, oh, well, crap, I don't have a 40 amp, I only have a 30 amp, so what do I have to do? Can I even do it if I have a 30 amp ESC or not? Right. And I think that's why I was saying, so it's size, weight, battery size, motor size, ESC that accompanies that for the wattage that you need, right, for the amps and watts that you need, and then a prop size that goes along with that. Those
and I think that's ultimately what you're looking for, is that the motor, the ESC, and the prop are the combination that will drive whatever
the watts that you're trying to get out of it.
Your watts you're trying to get out of it.
Right.
Correct.
And I was going to say, one of the things you guys you're kind of going over is that at least with the ESCs, one of the nice things is you can get away with getting a bigger one, and you won't go wrong other than it's bigger, taking up more space.
Yeah, it may take more space or weigh a little bit more, but not so much significantly that you'd be
going back to like the Tough Wings or to your fundraiser, right? So you could run same prop, same motor with either a 3-cell or a 4-cell. You just had to have it an ESC that was able to handling 4 cells.
Yes.
Going down lower, you may go a little slower and it may not be as efficient, but you could go ahead and use the 3S.
Right.
But you want to
still
put 4S
fly. And
you don't have to worry about ever burning it up.
Yeah. And that one flew just fine on the 3-cell. It was a rocket ship.
In the same, in the same token, I have a 150 amp ESC that would work on any airplane you own.
Right.
But it's the size of the battery, so it weighs that much, right? So, it's got a heat sink to it. So
we're back to the size of the airplane again here. When you said size of the battery, what you're really talking about is the shell of the plane. Can it hold the battery that you're going to put in it? Yeah.
Right.
So
which goes back to my example of my pattern airplane that would only take a 4-cell. It was only wide enough in the center. I could not put a 6-cell.
So that was your long pole that you had to solve for, really, or short pole in this case. Yeah. That you had to solve for, so that you can then go out the other things. But those seem to be, I think that was, as you were talking, you guys said all those things in the last podcast, but to have them laid out like you just laid them out, I think is really the right, not the right way, but it's probably the best way or a good way to isolate down what size motor you want, what size battery you're going to end up using, etc. Jay made a good point. I think he referenced the fact that Mike made reference to the fact that I have 3-cell batteries. So in my case, I might start with the premise that, well, whatever it is, it has to run off a 3-cell. Now, I'm automatically limiting myself inappropriately, possibly, by doing that, but it's a choice I'm making out of the gate. But if I want to see, what would be a good motor for this, I would erase that limitation that I placed on myself, and I would just say, okay, given the limitation of this weight, what do I need? Given the limitation of the size of the plane, what do I need? Or what will fit next? And sort of narrow it down as you go across. I would call that back to front, right? Because the weight of it, and then you go from fuselage and then up to the motor and
now
to the prop,
using your favorite saying is that it depends because even though you have a 3-cell and you're limiting, I know that's why I was giving you credit, if you had a 3-cell you can always combine the batteries, right?
That's
you can parallel or series and make it a 6-cell, but once again you were still limiting. So if you wanted to get a bigger airplane, it just required a little more power. You could always take the two,
True.
put them together, and say, okay,
True.
well, now I got a 6L.
True.
But we're limited by space again. I've got airplanes
space
where
and weight disbursement,
Correct.
right? Because now
Weight
you might
disbursement.
throw the CG off because you put one battery behind the other. You can't stack them because it's not tall enough or
Correct.
whatever.
Correct.
Now you got a bad CG because
Right.
of that choice, right?
So I actually, believe it or not, have a Hotliner glider, and this is a perfect example because the Hotliner glider is carbon fiber, and it has a very narrow fuselage. And so when I was looking at putting a ESC battery, motor, prop, all of that into it, I had to measure it and say, okay, well, my most limiting factor at the moment is a battery because it needs to run off of a 4-cell. So finding a 4-cell battery that would fit inside that fuselage was quite a task. But once I found it, I realized that I could only get a 4-cell that was in the 3800 or 2200 milliamps, right?
because of the physical characteristics of it.
Right, because of the size and the weight and everything, and it would slide. So now I had to actually drop down to 2 cells and put the 2, because the 2-cell was smaller, and then I shoved it further back at a 1000, or I think it's 1100, and I put another 1100 in there, put them in parallel, right? Series parallel. Put them in parallel, and now I have a 4-cell battery that is actually two cells, but it fits. So now I've solved that problem of having the 4-cell battery fit. Now I have to figure out in this little space how big of a ESC I need.
Yeah.
And so
What's
I'm
the
looking to
smallest
say,
ESC I
what's
can
the
put in here,
smallest
and
I
where
can
can I
put
put
in
it?
there and still have enough amperage to drive this motor.
And not
And then
smoke
the
it.
motor was very specific as well because, the motor had to fit inside the front of, that particular part. And of course I have a folding prop. So the prop was pretty much, given. So it is kind of a puzzle, and you can, Jay is correct when he says it depends on what you have. But I think if you got a piece of paper, if Jim sat down and said, okay, I've got a, 6-pound airplane, I've got, a 4-cell battery or a 6-cell battery that I want to use on it. Now, what that combination there, I need X amount of watts to get this to fly the way I want it to, whether it's 100, 150, 200 plus. The type of airplane. If it's a trainer airplane, I don't want 300 watts of power on there. Or 3,000 watts. It's going to rip the wings off.
Well, I do.
So I have to be, whatever. But so I have to be cognizant of that, right? And then get all that written down, and then that's going to narrow me down into a smaller group, of what I need to look at. If I have to buy new stuff, if I have stuff that is current existing, like me or Jay, where I've got, a box of motors, I can look through there and find one that may fit the bill.
AZ Mike, so this just remind me of something. So remember when you came up to Alaska and I think you built a Slow Fly 28 at the house?
I did.
You built it in 10 minutes, took me 20 minutes or an hour.
Something like that.
So I think you brought up the components, and so was yours? Yeah, I think you had the 2-cell. Yours was a 2-cell,
I did.
And mine was a
2-cell.
3-cell. And that was
correct.
Very interesting comparison because the aircrafts had similar performances to a certain degree. But because yours was a 2-cell and lighter, actually you could get a higher, you could hover a lot better than I could. Because your plane was just that much lighter.
And I had a bigger prop.
Yeah, well, you had
a slightly
to have
bigger prop,
right? But the thing
it wasn't that much different though. But I mean, I was able to. I think I went from like a 8 to a 9.
Yeah,
right.
But my thing is that the two planes performed the same, but they did. In the outer edges of the performance envelope is where they kind of shone because with my 3-cell, I could fly a little bit longer. But because my plane was heavier, I couldn't stand it on the prop as easily as you could or hold it as long because your plane was just that little bit, a few grams lighter. It could perform better just because of the fact, but because, the motor combinations were so close. So it's one of those things where, hey, you got a 2-cell, I got a 3-cell. Hey, they perform almost verbatim. You can get very similar performances, but at the outer edges of, their peaks, there were some differences, but, all in all, if we were flying or doing our thing, hey, they were almost the same.
Yeah, they didn't notice, right? You didn't notice that much of a difference.
Mm-hmm. So, not to confuse
and I think
anymore.
they both of them used the same ESC as well.
Oh, yeah,
I think we both had the same one. So we were able to get away with, the motor looked identical, believe it or not. It was the same size. It just had a little bit different winding in it, and so it just
and a different
performed a little
KV,
bit
of
different.
course.
Yeah, it was slightly. I think I was 1500 kV.
You probably had a lower kV than his. This is probably 1700. You probably had 15.
Yeah, I think I was
or 13 or whatever,
13
right?
something, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I could use a lower. Or maybe that was backwards. Maybe
you guys got that backwards.
13.
It should have been you had the higher KV.
Because if you have a lower KV, I can use a bigger prop. So
right, but either way.
Anyway, they were spinning about the same. I mean, I don't think the prop spun any different. I mean, they so much power going through it. Which once again we kind of have these limitations. We kind of put them together, and then that's how we kind of get this thing started. But Jim had mentioned also, he kind of wrote us back and after listening to the podcast and had a couple more questions. And I think, Jay, one of the questions was the C rating of the battery, right?
Right. So he was wondering for for this particular problem, right? Is it better to have a 30C or a 60C? Is a 30C good enough for a large plane, or do you have to have a 60 or 80 or 90 or 110C? For a bigger aircraft.
Yeah, and so two things with that. Number one, when we first started flying, the biggest battery you could get was maybe 5 or 10C. Yeah. And when we found that there were 10C batteries out there, it was like woohoo, you could fly it. Mike mentioned earlier off air that it's all about. What did you say the word was? All about. I can't remember the term you used. You were talking about the energy coming through.
The draw, the draw.
It's all about the draw from the battery. Now, having said that, the other side of that coin is, in today's world, if you bought a new battery, you're probably going to get a 40C battery. I mean, I honestly don't know when the last time I even saw a 10C or a 20C battery.
Well, if they sell them, they're not telling you.
No, they are selling them. They're selling them, but they're selling them for a different product.
Right. But my point is, they're not really telling you 10C anymore, and they're so damn cheap. You're like, oh, this is a 2200 3-cell for like $2. Holy crap! And then you realize, after some investigation, that's really just a 10C battery, and they can't give those things away because the well, you draw an LED light. An LED light can, right? But that's it. Any kind of thing with the amp on it is going to be like, it's going to kill the battery.
Well, believe it or not, if you look into the FPV world, a lot of the drone manufacturers are the long distance guys, that fly for hours and hours, that they can go up and fly. Those batteries are big, like 22,000 milliamps, and they have a very low C rating. Because the engines that are running on those are very slow. They aren't drawing hardly anything because they're meant to draw.
And with the depth of 22,000, the 22,000 milliamps also gives it the draw strength it needs anyway. It gives it an overhead for the pull, right? Because that's really the burst. That C rating is really the burst. If I understand it right, is the burst speed, the burst amount.
If you went from idle thrust to full power, back and then back to full power, that's going to give you this energy where you're drawing and then you're not, and then you're drawing, so it spikes. And you can actually see that on a watt meter. You can go ramp it up really fast and you can see those watts really peg out, and then if you come down and then just kind of move it up, you can see that there's a difference. It's the equivalent of trying to get your entire swimming pool drained through a garden hose. Mm-hmm. Or you can do it through a 5 or 10 inch pipe, right? You're going to get much more water moving through a 10 inch pipe than you will through your water hose. So therefore, draining the pool is going to go much faster if you have this big 10 inch pipe. And that's kind of the best way I can explain it. If you have a very high amp draw motor, such as an EDF, then you want a very big pipe that's able to draw a lot of energy without restricting it. Because a large portion of that draw is it's creating heat, and the heat inside your battery is not a good thing. So you want it to be able to discharge at a very high rate and the C rating is what gives you that. So if you got a 90C or a 100C battery, that's really geared more towards a very high amp draw EDF or fan, some sort of a fan that if you're flying jets, and then that way you can be a little more aggressive on the throttle, and you're not going to over temp your battery.
So
plus you've got
really
6
know,
cells you're trying to there.
Right. So how am I going to really know that 30C is enough or not?
Well, in Jay's world, he knows it's not enough when his battery comes down after his flight and it's all puffed up. So
I'm cooking pancakes.
Yeah, that's a little late. That's a little late.
It is a little late.
That's a little late.
Yeah. It is a little late.
Poof. Look like a puffer fish. That may be bad.
Poof Daddy, that's your Poof Daddy battery.
That's true. I will tell you that after having spoken with several battery manufacturers, and we had a battery sponsor for a while, and he kind of walked us through some of that stuff, and knowing guys that do testing for it, a lot of that has to do with the lithium content in the battery. The higher the quality of lithium, and the more you have available to you, the less problems you're going to have with the battery. So if you have, let's just for giggles, I'll say 80%. So 80% of your battery is lithium, and then the other 20% are fillers or gels or whatever they're using in there. Then if you're drawing, the lithium's not able to keep up. Even if it's 100C and you're running that thing really hard, you're going to get a puffy battery. Now, the lower end batteries, such as the 3-cell, 4-cell, 5 cells, those things, you're trying to draw a lot of energy from them. That could cause a lot of heat, and that would cause them to puff up. But there are other manufacturers that I'm aware of that I use that I've had, I've been full throttle and idle and full throttle and doing aerobatics in a jet that, I never had a puffing problem because the quality of the lithium is at 99.9%, and I'm getting a full, quality battery energy through the ESC and out to the motor.
Right.
So I think a lot of that has to do. I mean, sometimes we equate it out with pricing. If the battery's $100+, it's probably going to be a good battery. But I don't necessarily.
Well, you don't know.
Think
That's
always
not
true.
always.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So I have a question for you. So if you have a battery, if you have a motor that's going to pull so many amps, and maybe you're going to figure that out by the using a watt meter, right? To figure out how many amps. Is there a point at which it makes sense to go from a 30C to a 60C where that would make it not puff up? Like, what's the point at which that is it twice the amount of the amperage? Is it 1 1/4? Like what?
That's a good question.
Is there a way to do that?
That's a good question. I would have to look into that and try to figure some of that out. I don't know that answer right off the top of my head.
Maybe one of our listeners knows, and they can kind of chime in.
Maybe so. Yep.
Because I think everybody's has bought a battery that should have been a good quality or whatever, and then you take it out, and then you're not doing anything special, and it comes down and it's puffy, and you're like, "What the heck? I wasn't going crazy with it. I wasn't."
Right.
Well, and we've all had
a Monday
the
or a
conversation.
Friday battery.
Yeah, we've all had the conversation about, hey, your plane needs a 30 amp ESC, buy a 40 amp.
Yeah.
Because what you don't know if they're really giving you a ESC that is going to handle that 30 amps or not.
Or they are rated for like 10% over whatever it is.
Right, but even with that, it might be it could be plus or minus 10%. You don't know.
Yeah, you don't
necessarily.
know. You don't know.
Because
some name brands
made it.
Yeah, and I would caution you in the process of an ESC purchase, a motor purchase, and a battery purchase, that you look at a brand. You've got one of two choices. You can buy the cheapest one out there and just call it, what it is. And Jay and I used to do that all the time. We'd buy $5 motors, and if it burned up, it's $5, right? What do we care?
Yeah.
But if I'm going to pay for something and I want it to last, I'm going to look at somebody that's got good reviews. I'm going to look at companies that are reputable and that have some sort of a warranty that if the battery puffs, I can take it back or send it back and say, hey, look, this battery wasn't a good one, and they'll send me a new one. And there are several manufacturers that do that.
So I know we don't have much time left. So do you want to just summarize what we talked about, Mike, or do you want to, do you feel like we beat this dead horse already?
No, I think it's a good summary that we kind of clarified in your eyes. I think we clarified that there is a method to our madness, that if you start at the weight of the aircraft, look at your battery limitations and the size of the airplane, if you can fit that stuff in there, and then look at what kind of motor ESC combo, and then with all of that information, you can look and say, hey, how am I going to fly this? If I'm going to fly it as a sport aircraft, maybe I only need a 30C battery. If I'm going to fly it as a 3D airplane and really hunk on it, and put a lot of energy through it, maybe I need a 60C. So all of that combined, kind of gets you along the track. And then once you get down that track, then Jay's Depends comes in all over the place, where you can say, okay, well, what kind of prop?
Not doing it, not wearing them.
Do I need an electric? Do I need a whatever kind of prop? And then it's just a matter of taste, and we can kind of go over that. But I think you brought up a lot of valid points. Hopefully we answered Jim's question. I think it's still worthy of some more discussion. So join us on the next episode when we kind of continue this discussion on gas to electric conversions. If you have something that you'd like to ask, parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com, and give us a jingle, or hit us up on our Facebook account at the Park Flyer Podcast Listeners Group, and let us know what you think. So Fantastic. From Michael here in Arizona,
and Jay from the hills of Texas, I'm Jay.
And AK Mike in Texas.
All right, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Let's fly.
You have been listening to the Park Flyer Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit. Please give our show a star rating and review, and feel free to email us your questions, topics, or suggestions to parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com.